Retro Hangover is supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We'd especially like to thank patrons Lyle McCarnes, Ashton Ruby, Randall Quiggle, Tony G, Stud Still Smash the Milkman, Keith Gasper, Raging Demon, Miss Peachy, Mass Keaton, Diskai Mara, Ozzy Garcia, JC, Megan Caruso, Andrew Liguori, Lunchbox, aka the Disgruntled Gamer, Adam from The Good, the Bad, the Backlog, Rick Firestone, Dave Jackson, Jenny E, Retro Overdrive, Soha, Parallax Puddles, The Emperor, Storm Beagle, Matt, aka Stormageddon, B. Ross and Van Fernal from Super Garbage Day, Gary Heather, the Retro Vixen, Eric Guess, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast, Ash Events, Alan Bingham, Mike the Ref from Backbreaker Gaming, Ryan Player One, Low 5 Alex, Alt, Renner Dreaming, and Oh Me. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated.
Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to the most recent episode of Retro Hangover.
Retro and classic gamers, welcome to the podcast where we adventure asylums and alienate asinine assailants. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with, as always, your host, Shane, the Dark Dick Knight Dragon.
I think this might have been one of the more coherent intros. Like the alliteration all makes sense. Surprising.
It's probably because my brain is fried. It's completely fried right now.
So you're more coherent when your brain is gone? Is that how that works?
Why do you think I drink so much?
It all makes sense now.
Ah, yes. Well, how are you? We do not have a guest this time.
We don't. No, I don't even know what we're gonna do with ourselves. How do we do a podcast again? We usually just rely on other people to kind of keep things moving forward. I don't know how this works.
We just kind of talk to them and like, well, how are you doing? And they give their little background, and I feel so naked. I feel so naked. It feels so wrong. It feels odd. But it's just us this week, so I guess we can get right into it before we talk about, well, not get right into it, because we have to do our usual stuff that we are want to do.
That's true.
Before we talk about the game du jour, which is Batman Arkham Asylum. But let's get the show moving with the what are we playing today section of this podcast. So Shane,
yes,
what has been going on in your digital adventures?
Oh, let's see. I think the majority of what I've been up to has just been a lot of Diablo 4. I managed to squeeze in enough time to finish out the rest of the seasonal stuff for season 4, which if you happened to join us on the Sunday streams, you would have seen me doing that at the time of this recording anyway, just this past Sunday. So, if you're not doing that, shameless plug, you're clearly missing out. So you should get in on that action. So I wrapped that up, and just in the nick of time, because season 5 just dropped like 2 days ago. And so I've fired up I decided to go with a rogue this time. They seem to be pretty strong this season. So I'm leveling a rogue and enjoying the new seasonal stuff. The Infernal Hordes gameplay mode's pretty fun. Some of the additions have been nice. I dare say that, iteratively Diablo 4 has been getting better and better. So I'm pretty happy about that. But that's kind of it. That's really all that I've had time to allow for, is just really getting in on the good old Diablo. Other than that, it's just the usual small smattering of bite-sized gaming on my phone here and there when when time allows. Still rocking the Necromerger. I don't even know how long I've been at that now. I think my wife and I have been playing it for like at least, I want to say 2 or 3 years, something like that. Maybe longer. I don't know. But yeah, that's me, man. I don't know. What about you? What you got going on?
Oh, man. Reading a lot of stuff about finances and going insane.
Okay, cool.
I guess that's a game.
What about, I mean, you could argue that. I mean, the stock market is a game, so yes.
It is a game. I'm not playing the stock market. It's like a tutorial. And I'm getting my ass kicked at the tutorial. And like I already said, my brain is fried. I'm like at an extreme high level of anxiety because this is going to determine if I can get a job or not. So it's pretty wild. It's fun.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, none. Aside from that, I've played a little bit more of Euden, and I think that's pretty much all I've played. I didn't even play a ton of that because I've been trying to beat the game we're talking about today. So yeah, I've been just busy.
Well, there you have it.
It's pretty short. Not much going on.
Yeah, I find it, and I'm sure some listeners probably also find it at least somewhat humorous that the two people who are running a video game podcast chronically have very little time to actually play video games. Maybe that's why we're a retro game podcast, because we can just talk about stuff that like already happened, because there's no way on earth that we will ever keep up with like new releases ever.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I felt like I had such more flexibility last year. It's just kind of like all evaporated. It's wild how that happens.
I think it's funny because it's definitely, I'm going to say, at least mildly selfish, and in the grander scheme of things, probably not the greatest thing to wish for. But I have definitely heard at least 1 or 2 other people say something to the effect of, man, I wish there was another pandemic so I could have time to do shit.
Yeah. Well, the thing is like I don't have time, and I don't have to go to work. I'm not working. I just have to work towards work. It's so depressing right now. I hate this.
That's right, folks. Join the middle-aged men potentially going through crises as we talk about games that came out back when we still had hope in our eyes. Did that get too dark? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I guess speaking of our histories,
speaking of dark,
when they were better, dark, maybe they were better. I mean, there's still plenty of good things, I assume. We need to talk about the brief history of this game. I mean, that was also a brief discussion about what we've been playing today. So, Shane,
yeah,
this seems like a game that is, well, it's probably up both of our alleys if you look at our histories, but I think you're better suited to give the brief history today on Batman Arkham Asylum.
Video games and comic book characters. There's no denying fans of these two things have significant overlap. Video games have been featuring stories from all sorts of comics going back to the earliest of days. However, that doesn't mean that these games were necessarily very good. Over the years, even the good comic book games weren't at the same level as the top games of their day. But in 2009, one title stuck out amongst the crowd as one of the best games of the year, period. And that game was Batman Arkham Asylum. In 2007, relatively unknown at the time, British developer Rocksteady Studios was tapped by Eidos Interactive to make a Batman game, shortly after obtaining the license in a co-publishing role with Warner Bros. Interactive. At the same time, DC Comics asked writer Paul Dini, who penned Batman the Animated Series, to create a story for the game. Dini agreed, as he wanted to create an original story for Batman rather than have a game take a plotline that had already been told with other media. When Rocksteady and Dini met soon after, they found their ideas aligned and got off to the races on their new project. They set the game in the infamous Arkham Asylum, the location where Batman's adversaries are sent after he thwarts their plans. Inspiration would come from all sorts of sources. From the comic realm, primary inspiration would come from Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum, a serious house on Serious Earth, among works from Neil Adams and Frank Miller. In terms of games, the developer cited BioShock, in terms of its atmosphere and story delivery, and Zelda and Metroid in regards to their gameplay and sense of progression. Rocksteady would also put quite a bit of effort into designing the game's combat system, which started as a rhythm game, before eventually morphing into the system focused on fluidity and timing that we all know and love today. And to really nail home that atmosphere and make it feel like a truly authentic Batman game, voice actors Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, and Arlene Sorkin would reprise their roles as the Batman, the Joker, and Harley Quinn, respectively, from the aforementioned acclaimed animated series. Batman Arkham Asylum was released for the PS3 and Xbox 360 on August 25th, 2009 in North America, August 28th in Europe, and September 3rd in Australia. The PC version was released just a few weeks later in mid-September. It landed to critical acclaim, receiving a 92 in aggregate according to Metacritic, leading it to be considered the most critically acclaimed superhero game ever, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. Critics generally took to that line of praise in their write-ups and lauded the game's environments and atmosphere, as well as its combat, only falling short in the game's boss fights. Publications would also shower the game with various awards and nominations at the end of the year. Sales for the game were high as well, with Arkham Asylum selling 4.3 million units in its lifetime for the first issue of its release. Due to this success, a series would inevitably be born. A sequel would be released in 2011 with Batman Arkham City, as well as 2 additional games with the likes of Batman Arkham Origins and Batman Arkham Knight in 2013 and 2015 respectively. Additionally, the game was remastered and released on later consoles, with the PS4 and Xbox One seeing a version in 2016 and the Nintendo Switch getting one of its very own in 2023. And that is your brief history of Batman Arkham Asylum.
I hate to downplay the development and the brief history of this, but it pretty much sounds like AAA development cycle, just with the right people in charge. It's pretty basic.
Yeah. I mean, well, actually, I was going to say we'll get into this, but I don't know if we will, because I don't know if there's a good spot for it in our usual categories. But I think one of the biggest things that really helped Arkham Asylum get to where it eventually got to, as far as being such a well-regarded game, was the fact that it wasn't beholden to, any other like tie-in property. Like a lot of the other games, like especially the ones more or less right before it with things like Batman Begins, that of course tied into the movie of the same name. They all needed to follow basically the same storyline. And because of that, I think, well, they suffered for a number of reasons, but that one especially, just because there wasn't a lot of room for creativity, and that wasn't the case here. They didn't have to shoehorn a bunch of like shit into it. And so I think the team had a lot of freedom to really do like what they wanted to do with it.
Yeah, you get that sense throughout playing the game as well. And I don't know anything about what Batman was doing in the comics. I haven't watched the animated series since I was probably in elementary school or middle school.
Yeah.
Not saying it's bad. It's fantastic.
No, it's incredible.
Oh, yeah. But I think they could have put anything in there and I probably would have gotten behind it. But the fact they made something original instead of just going back to something, you're right. They have the freedom to express and to create in a way that could line up with the visions of the developers. And so they don't like have to hamstring theirself solely to lore. And they still do, of course, because Batman has lore. But the story that's in there within itself is just like an alternate universe, which is something that, of course, comics have been doing since the beginning of time.
Right.
It's just within the established universe that Batman is, which is cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and this kind of dovetails a bit into like the plot and writing section, but
yeah,
having the writer for the animated series, or one of the writers for the animated series, be such an integral part of the construction of the plot for this game is huge. Like, and just the fact that they took that extra step to really include, you know, a lot of those resources from that show, because it was so well made and so well regarded. It's like, it just feels right.
Yeah. You know what's also scary about that brief history? The fact that the remasters are just 2 years removed from technically being on the show.
Yes. Time. The thing that will eventually get us all.
Yeah, it's inevitable. But speaking of time, it is time to get into our own personal experiences. So, Shane, how did you come about getting to Arkham Asylum? When did you hear about it? When did you start playing it?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I know for a fact that I did not play it like right when it came out. And I think part of that was, I mean, full disclosure, I'm not like a huge Batman fan or anything. Like, I like Batman, but I've never really been a big comics person anyway. Like, I'm like the comics equivalent of like the dude that just shows up for like the playoffs of a sport, because I'm not that involved, you know? So I like Batman, but I've never been like real deep into like reading the graphic novels and the comics and all the lore and whatever. Everything I know is through like social osmosis or like movies or what have you. So I know I didn't jump on it right away. I think the other thing is that I was sort of in the camp of a lot of people at the time, which was very hesitant about this game because, you know, much like a scorned lover, we've been burned too many times before by superhero games. Yeah. And I was just like, I don't know. And especially, and I pointed it out in the brief history, but given that at the time, Rocksteady was really a relatively unknown and unproven development house, that coupled with the fact that we tend to have a string of at best mediocre superhero games, it was kind of like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. So I didn't get to it right away. I want to say I probably picked it up on Steam when it was on sale at some point a number of years after. So that is where I played it, though. I didn't play it on a console. I played it on PC for sure. But when I did finally pick it up and play it, man, I mean, I kind of feel like this is the same thing as the Chrono Trigger episode, that it's like, am I spoiling anything? Probably not. I really fucking liked it. So I don't think that's surprising at all. But yeah, that was me. I'm going to look up when I actually played it last on Steam. So while I'm doing that, why don't you share your personal experience?
It mirrors yours, pretty much one for one, except I would say more. I didn't get into it just because, I mean, one, it was a licensed game, but two, it seemed like one of those really kind of mainstream dude bro games that Call of Duty fans liked. And so that's why I was hesitant, because it had like the dark grittiness to it. And we're going to get into this with graphics, but it looked a lot like Gears of War. And I liked Gears of War, but I also had moved on from that, and I had started getting back into RPGs when it came out, like your Mass Effects. I was very, very high on the Mass Effect series during this time, the BioWare stuff. Getting into my Wii, playing Wii games. I think I'd just gotten a PlayStation 3 during this time too. So this is around the time I was playing Persona 4. So the weeb in me was like, no, you're not going to play this. You're not going to like it. It's just, your typical action game that mainstream gamers like and critics crave for because it's going to be a massive commercial success. Whatever.
Right.
Like, just ignore it. Go away. Don't play it. I think eventually I just caved and bought it, probably because it was $5. And I was like, okay, I'll get it. It looked like my first achievement. I'm looking at my list of achievements. The first achievement I got for this game was in 2012. But I did not beat the game in 2012. In fact, I would be shocked. I'm not saying shocked, but it's highly possible that I probably talked about playing this when we launched the podcast in 2015, because it says I initially beat the game in May of 2015. So it's been that long since I've played it. But when I went through it, I'm like, oh, wow, I really like this game. Like, there's a lot more to it than just being that dude bro game. And so I went from there, and I think I didn't play any other of the Arkham games or anything that followed. But yeah, I mean, I finally picked it up 6 years after it came out, and that's when I finally beat it after just kind of ignoring it for so long. And I still haven't learned my lesson, of course, because I haven't played any of the other ones, whether or not they're good, because I've just heard mixed things. No, wait, I have played Arkham City. I played it on the Wii U, and it was fine. Is it better than Arkham Asylum? Yeah, we'll talk about that at the end of the episode. But yeah, that's kind of my personal experience there.
Yeah, so that's you're right. That's fairly close to mine. So when I looked it up, my entry for Arkham Asylum on Steam, I finished it in October of 2011. So not too far. It was like 2 years after it released on PC. And by that time, it was, the inevitable Game of the Year edition.
Same.
But yeah, so 2011 is when I played it last.
Ooh, well, glad we played it again today. At least I did. I don't know if you did.
I'm entirely operating off of memory, so we'll see how it goes.
Oh, that would be good. That would be good. Okay, so speaking about going off of memory, we'll get into the plot and writing of this. And to kind of give you a brief synopsis, the game starts out with you as Batman. You have collected Joker, arrested Joker. I don't know. It's an asylum. It's not a prison. But you have defeated Joker in something, and he's been going about doing his Joker things. But this time, you realize that it was easier to catch him than it is normal. There's also a mention of the fact that there have been a bunch of his goons that were arrested at a place called Blackgate that were all sent to Arkham Asylum at the same time. Something's not adding up, and you as Batman are very suspicious. Well, come to find out that the Joker has been planning something all along this entire time, leading from a previous breakout from Arkham Asylum earlier on, previous to you catching him. What does the Joker have going on? What does he have up his sleeve? Why is Arkham going nuts? How did he have all this planned out? Just part of the narrative that just rolls out as you're playing this game. So that's pretty much the basis of it. You're going to go find the Joker and defeat him, as Batman does. Shane, did I miss anything? And if not, what did you think of the plot writing here?
I mean, that's the general gist of it. I mean, he purposefully gets himself caught to lure you into Arkham Asylum because he's kind of already set up his plans with a number of the other members of the infamous Rogues Gallery to kind of enact his plan once you're in there. Also coupled with the fact that he's planted a number of bombs around Arkham City that you also
allegedly,
need to deal with. Allegedly, potentially. And yeah, so, I mean, that's the general gist of it. I mean, as far as the plot is concerned, I don't really have anything negative to say about it. I think it serves its purpose, right? Like it gets you into the situation that allows for the rest of the game's events to unfold. And I think the real strong piece here isn't necessarily the plot as much as I think it's the writing. I think that's really what drives this game more than anything, because the plot really is just a somewhat like skeletal structure to kind of hang the rest of the game's action on. Like it's just a reason to get you into Arkham Asylum, right? And then once you're there, that's where all the juicy stuff happens. But getting Paul Dini to pen the rest of this, and working in conjunction with him on the dialogue and like all of that stuff, like it does really show, because as I said before, it truly does feel like, potentially, at least for me, and it could be different for you, I don't know, but for me, this was really the first time that I truly felt like I was Batman. Like I was playing something that really truly immersed me into, Batman's sort of universe, in like a compelling way. And I think the smart dialogue and the delivery by the voice actors, which we'll touch on a bit later, went a really long way towards kind of accomplishing that.
I would kind of, in fact, I would agree with almost all of that. The writing is good. It's fantastic. Paul Dini did a great job of crafting this world, this environment, crafting the plot. I mean, it's not going to blow your mind. It just seems to be like, as you kind of mentioned, you know, you got the rogues gallery of Batman villains, and they come out and they make their appearances and they do what they do. Scarecrow scares the piss out of you. Croc does like the Croc thing. Poison Ivy is a thirst trap. So you have all these, you have the villains doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think when almost 10 years ago now, when I was in my late 20s, I mean, I was still enjoying that dark, gritty, edgy kind of thing. And it was still kind of, as they say, the style at the time. But today playing it, and like the plot, sometimes it just feels dark and gritty to be dark and gritty. There are times, especially when you get the patient tapes, and it's just like, Croc, do you eat people? I was like, yeah, I eat people. No, you don't. Yes, I do. And then it's like, oh my God, he eats people. And then, you know, you have the Riddler saying, you know, making dark jokes, and the Joker making dark jokes. And it's just all dark, 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 dark. And it's like, good Lord. I haven't read the comic books. I'm not a big into that. All I have is the animated series for reference. But from people who have read the comic books, or like what I've heard, like kind of in the ether, is that like this is a lot like Frank Miller's 80s comic books that just wanted to be so dark that it walks the line, and maybe some people would say it goes over the line, between like cool and super cringe. It gets there at times. I think the really cool parts though are when the Scarecrow is involved and when the Joker's involved. But outside of them, it's just kind of like tone it down maybe half a notch. And I'm sure a lot of people would probably yell at me for that, and because it's not bad. It's just at some point it's like, oh wow, it's just dead people constantly in a Batman game. And I don't think Batman's always been that dark. I think that's just certain parts of Batman, but I could be wrong.
No, I mean, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I might go so far as to say that just kind of Batman in general tends to constantly skirt that line of jumping into like full on hot topic territory, right? Sometimes it manages it better than others. And yeah, I think pointing out the thing with Frank Miller. Okay, so generally I like Frank Miller's stuff, like Sin City, fantastic, you know. But listen, I'm gonna totally admit that he is often a little bit more edgy than maybe needs to be.
Yeah,
and yeah, I can see what you're saying. I think I might be purposefully overlooking some of these things just because, to me, and I have to remember at the time, this is very much like a love letter to Batman fans. I mean, it was crafted in a way that it could be more accessible, right? Like you don't have to know, deep Batman lore or whatever to like truly enjoy the game. But in a way that if you do know enough about it, it may come across as like a little, how do I want to put this? A little unnecessarily like expository, I guess, in that like they introduce, right, like each of these characters of the Rogue Gallery, but like you and I and a lot of people who are at least, you know, tangentially familiar with Batman are just like, yeah, we fucking know who Poison Ivy is, right? So they had to kind of craft it in a way that sort of towed that line between like, okay, this person literally knows jack shit about Batman other than he's a superhero. So we kind of need to explain some of these things. But then also by including, and I think for the record, I think they really did cherry pick some of the best options as far as like Batman villains are concerned. And you kind of see that.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far into it, but you kind of see that in the later Arkham games where you're just like, oh, okay, that's Calendar Man. What the fuck? Like, like at some point they ran out of all the good ones, right? And so they're like, okay, we need to dig it towards the bottom of the barrel to like include some new villains in this game. But that's a discussion for another time. But because this was the first one, they kind of got the creme de la creme, and it definitely shows. I think I'm a little bit more forgiving of like some of the borderline cringe stuff than maybe you might be, just because it's like really the first time that I think a lot of these characters were introduced in this way and in such like a nice sort of compact package that I think I'm willing to kind of give a pass on maybe some of the, iffy writing and dialogue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that I don't think like I do think it does step over the line sometimes and how edgy it is. It's kind of comical, but I don't think it steps over it so much that you're getting into the realm of like Darksiders.
Yeah.
Like you're not decapitating people and then stepping on their skull or pissing down their throat, and Batman's not an edgelord, because Batman's the straight man of everything, even though he's a dude running around in a costume. But this is also the time, right around the time that the Dark Knight came out a year before, which means Batman Rises, or whatever the first one was. What's the name of the first one?
Batman Begins.
The Dark Knight. Is it Batman Begins?
Yeah, that was the first one.
Yeah, Batman Begins came out in 2005, so this is 4 years after that. They started production in 2007, 2008, so that was still fresh on their mind what that version of Batman was, and it just dials up that darkness just a little bit. But like, this is the time that people really saw Batman as a hyper dark character, and you made that reference earlier. That's the first game you really felt as the Batman. Well, if you look at Batman's video game history, that's not saying much, because a lot of them really fucking suck.
Yeah.
Outside of maybe the Sunsoft games, which were on the Genesis and NES, and of course on the PC Engine, but that game is, it's weird. But like, this is the first time you really got a quality Batman experience, and it just happens to be around the time when that like really hyper dark vision of what Batman was at the forefront. So it was the perfect tone for the time. Now, again, going back to it, for a lot of people, it's going to rely on your taste, how much you're going to appreciate it, how much you're going to like it. I could take it or leave it. I just kind of view it as a time capsule and was like, I'm not this dark and edgy anymore, but it's still good. Especially the Joker. Joker delivers the way he's written. We'll get into like sound later, because Mark Hamill does a fantastic job. There you go. There's kind of your spoilers, but the Joker is written exactly like you would imagine the Joker to be written, and it's perfect. So yeah, no real complaints there. Ending kind of sucks though, but whatever.
Right.
So let's get into the gameplay. I think the gameplay here really revolutionized the way that we think about superhero games, or really action games, but primarily superhero games. Because, I mean, let's just get right into the combat here. This is the basis of what has become Insomniac's Spider-Man combat. Maybe not the basis, but like whenever you ask anybody how to play the Spider-Man games, and of course the other Arkham games, this is what you have. Like you're fighting a bunch of bad guys. You see like a bunch of little lightning bolts come out of their head. You press Y to counter. Batman does a bunch of cool counter moves, and it's all you got to do is press a button, and Batman will do a thing, and it'll look really cool and makes you feel really badass. And that's the crux of the combat. I know there's a lot more to it, but I think when most people think about Batman, they think about the combat here in the Arkham series. What do you think?
No, absolutely. Like, I actually wouldn't even, I wouldn't even step that back or want to qualify it. I would 100% say that that Spider-Man game owes almost everything to Arkham Asylum. Like, it's a thing where it's not just superhero games. Like, to your point, Arkham Asylum set the standard for third-person action combat kind of until today. Like, it did it so well that it set the blueprint to which everybody followed afterwards. And that's a monumental thing in and of itself, but doubly so, in my opinion, coming from a superhero / licensed game, given the checkered history that those tend to have. So no, it's a huge thing. And I think I didn't know this until, we were kind of looking into the info for the brief history on this thing, but it 100% makes sense that the combat system started as a rhythm game.
Yeah, it does. I'm glad they didn't go that route because it allows it to be way more forgiving. Because I am a button masher.
Oh yeah, no, I would have hated it because I mean, when you say rhythm game, what that really is glorified QTE, and
yeah,
I would not want the entire game to be that. So I am glad that they decided to iterate a bit more on that before releasing it.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like a step up because I think the gold standard for 3D combat prior to this, because it's really a beat 'em up. This is the evolution of what you had in like the beat 'em up scene in the 90s. The closest thing you had to that prior to this would be God of War, God of War 1 and 2. And that has weapons, that has ranges, special abilities, kind of similar to this, but it's even with God of War, it didn't feel as fluid. I'm not saying God of War feels bad. I think God of War feels good, but it's not the up close and personal, really fluid combat. And the way that Batman reacts with every single enemy makes every single combo that you're doing feel unique and special, which is something yet you had not gotten before this game with like any game, at least to my recollection. I'm sure there's one and someone's going to be like, oh, do you know about this little game over here? No, I don't. There you go. Good for you.
Well, I was trying to think, I mean, like something like DMC came out before this, right? The original Devil May Cry.
But even that's more in the God of War realm.
It is. I'm just saying, like, so I'm just sort of reinforcing your point that like there were other third person action games that were doing something similar, but I don't think they quite nailed the fluidity that this does.
Bayonetta might be the closest one.
Yeah, that's true.
I have to see when Bayonetta came out because Bayonetta is right there too.
Yeah. Well, I think so one of the big things for me, because I recall even now having played this back, 13 years ago now? Good Lord. I remember when I first got into it, I actually almost didn't play it because at first when I got into it and I started like the combat, going through the tutorial, learning the combat, I didn't like it at first. Just, I think because it was so different. It was not what I was expecting.
Yes.
I thought like, oh, am I going to have to do this like very specific thing every single time I fight a group of enemies? Because that feels like it's going to suck. But I pretty quickly got over that and realized that the system does allow for you to really kind of freeform it to a certain extent. One of the things that really helps me though, and I think adds a lot to that sort of like fluid, almost dance-like quality of the combat, is the pretty generous counter window that this game has. It doesn't punish you with like if you don't counter this guy's attack, like with a split second it happens, well, fuck you, it's going to bust up your combo. Like it gives you a really wide window of time to be able to counter. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Like, I think it's almost critical to making this work as well as it does.
I had some issues with my most recent playthrough. I mean, I will chalk it up to a skill issue probably, because this is such an easy game to get into once you get into it. And I did get better throughout the game. But there would be times when I would be not fighting any enemies. An enemy would be coming up to me and get the little counter bubble over their head. But I'd already pressed the button to go into an animation, do a standard attack in their direction. And for whatever reason, it took Batman longer to wind up to do an attack than it would have for him to counter, causing me to take damage. I'm like, well, this is kind of shit. So there are times I had my frustrations with the combat system because I felt like I would press the counter button, but because I was in the middle of another animation, or as soon as the counter flash came up, I pressed the attack button one too many times because, once again, button masher. And by the time I was able to press the counter button, it would be a split second too late, causing me to take some damage.
I mean, honestly, that does sound like a skill issue. I'm not gonna
No, I'm not saying it isn't. But I mean, even with that being said, mean, that's why you get groups of enemies, like 8 or 9 enemies at a time.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's learning how to manage the battlefield and attack them properly and anticipate when you have to counter. That's all part of the game. Yeah, I mean, I only died, I think, once due to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like when there was like, and then I went and did the battle like immediately. And I will say, like, the checkpoints in this game are extremely generous.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get punished for dying at all, which is great. And this is on normal mode. No idea if hard's any different, but like, I went right back into the battle and then like only took 2 or 3 hits. I'm like, oh, okay. So I just had some bad luck.
Well, I think the thing that helped me with that was I kind of adjusted my approach to combat. Well, combat in general, but specifically when you have like groups of henchmen or whatever, I found that it was more effective generally rather than to be proactive, to actually be just reactive. Like in most cases, just waiting to counter an attack seemed to be more effective than trying to take a more offensive approach in a lot of cases, because then you kind of just wait for that opportunity. And I think that's the thing, is waiting for that opportunity to open up, then do the counter and then work into sort of your rhythm. That seemed to work a lot better. Now, whether or not you like that obviously is subjective. I'm not going to say that the combat system is perfect. And especially now with, other games having come out over the last 13 years that have taken this formula and refined and iterated on it. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that going back to this is probably going to feel a little janky, but I don't think it's enough to say that it's like it hasn't aged well. Like I mean, again, spoiler, but generally speaking, I think the combat still holds up extremely well even today.
Yeah, I generally think it does as well. Let's get into, I guess, I could be considered one of the game's more controversial points, and that's the detective mode, because this game does have a ton of stealth elements. You're expected to be stealthy. Yeah. So yeah, while you have great combat and it does give you all that, sometimes your opponents will have guns, and going into them and fighting them, just fisticuffs right off the bat is going to get you completely fucking wasted. So don't do that. So what they do is they give you these environments and you're supposed to sneak up on them, use your gadgets, hide in the environment, or get up on these gargoyles that are just conveniently placed throughout the asylum. That's for you to do drop towns, which you have to do an upgrade for, by the way. They're not on default. You do have an experience system. I don't think we have to talk about that too much, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stealth elements, and I'll say this about the stealth elements. It fucking works.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's only like a couple times where I'm like, oh, this is bullshit. How do they see me? And there are instances in every stealth game that are like that. But for the most part, you get really rewarded for doing stealth correctly. Mm-hmm. And I'm not used to that.
Yeah, no, that's valid.
So what'd you think of the stealth elements? What'd you think of detective mode? Because detective mode for me, like, never came off.
I was going to say, I'm surprised that apparently it's somewhat divisive. Like, I actually really liked the detective mode. Like, I think it fits into the Batman as the world's greatest detective thing pretty well. And it directly feeds into making the stealth as effective as it is. So no, I actually really enjoy it. And it does help with not only combat situations, but also identifying like, key items and what have you. So no issue on that for me. And as far as like the stealth in the game goes, coming from someone who really enjoyed something like the Splinter Cell series, it really was a pleasure to find that they implemented stealth in this game in a way that was as successful as it is. And to your point, as rewarding as it is, because you will quickly find that if you just try to brute force your way through a lot of encounters, it will not end well for you. Going into a gunfight with your fists is not generally the best idea, even if you are Batman. That was incredibly enjoyable for me. Like, I loved the strategy of trying to figure out like, okay, I can sort of like, grapple hook my way across to these different vantage points in this room to assess everything, see where all the henchmen are. figure out like what's my best route of attack. Like I'll knock out like these two with the batarangs, and then I'll drop down behind this one and knock him out. And that sort of like strategic assessment of a lot of the encounters, I really dug that. So no, I'm 100% for it. I think it was done extremely well.
What I mean by detective mode, like my criticisms of it and why it's slightly divisive, is that there's almost no penalty to having it on. Yeah. And it does reveal so much of the environment, and it gives you so much information that the question more becomes, what's the point of having it off? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point. I recall generally having it on more often than not, for sure. I think it was more of a case of not so much like turning it on when I felt I needed it, but more turning it off when I wanted to just see the environment like as it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But again, that I don't know, that didn't really bother me too much. Like I liked the fact that it gave you as much information as it did. Like I think it feeds into that sort of almost power fantasy of being Batman, right? Because listen, Batman's superpower is that he's a 1%er. Okay. So like, of course we're going to have a bunch of really sweet ass gadgets that like, the guys that you're beating up on definitely don't have. So I think it makes sense in a way, like even from a like in-universe perspective, to have this almost unfair advantage at all times. So I don't know. It worked for me.
I didn't really care much for the gadgets, to be honest with you. I found that they were more devices to find Riddler trophies than anything.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's the one thing that some people have pointed out as like being one of the very few potential sort of like detractors from an otherwise pretty stellar game is that as good as the combat system is, there can be a tendency for you to kind of just fall into a rhythm of just doing the same thing for the entire game, which potentially could get kind of boring, if that doesn't work out well for you. And the reason I'm saying that is because it kind of fits to your point a little bit about the gadgets, in that you don't necessarily have to use any of them if you don't really want to, I guess, or you just pick like a favorite and just kind of make that work. So you aren't, unless you're going for those things, which it sounds like we're kind of sort of segueing into talking about more of the exploratory elements of the game. Like, unless you're going to go for those things, which again is not required, by and large, you can just sort of like settle on a strategy that works for you, and more or less just kind of do that for the entire game, with the exception of maybe the boss encounters.
Yeah, and we can talk about the boss encounters really quickly, because if we're going to talk about things that are not that great, I think the boss encounters figure into that.
Really?
Because they do kind of suck. I think they suck.
Okay, I think you and I disagree on that one.
I mean, well, suck is a strong word. I don't think they're very clever or unique, because it gets to a point where pretty much all the bosses, starting with Bane, and you've already fought a character like this, is they charge at you, throw a batarang at their face, get out of the way, beat them up, dodge their attacks, wash, rinse, repeat. And that's for the majority of every single boss fight. I mean, there's the exception of the Ivy fight, which is just dodge and throw batarang at her. And then there's Croc, which is run away from him and throw batarang at him.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess that's true. I don't know. I thought that. Okay, you're right. But again, I may be like unfairly giving the game a pass when maybe it doesn't deserve it. But I felt like the different environments and the different like ways that the boss encounters occur, and like the way that you interact with it, I thought was like novel enough to sort of like allow you to overlook maybe the fact that like if you really get down to the mechanics of it, they're not generally that different. And that might just be like a consequence of just like lots of, colors and flashy lights. That might just be my reptile brain just being like, yeah, it's cool. Look at all the things happening, when really it's just not all that different. But I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I can see what you're getting at. I don't know if I'm on the same like page as far as that is concerned with you, but like I can definitely see it.
Now the Scarecrow boss fights were fantastic.
Oh, that one's awesome. Yeah, probably my favorite, I think.
Yeah. Scarecrow is probably he dies in this game. But or it's assumed he dies. He becomes croc food. He's like one of my favorite villains in terms of their concept in this entire game. He is like so fucking cool, and those segments are some of the best in gaming, period. They are so awesome. But you said you wanted to segue into the exploratory like it's an area. The exploratory
the
exploratory functions of this game. The exploratorium. Let's go to the exploratorium. How's the exploratorium in Batman, Shane?
Yeah, okay. So I need to preface this that you are hearing a subjective opinion from the person that felt it necessary to collect all 100 feathers in Assassin's Creed 2.
You hate yourself.
Yes, that's basically what I'm saying. It also harkens back to a time when I had enough free time to do that sort of shit. But anyway.
Yeah.
So I think I actually really like it. I think you kind of hated the Riddler trophies.
No, I didn't.
Really? Because I thought you did. It kind of sounded like you did.
I don't hate them. I lament them, but I don't hate them.
Okay.
Because I'll get into why. I'll let you say your piece first, but I don't hate them.
Okay.
I actually went out of my way to collect them more often than not. And when I say more often than not, like always.
Gotcha. All right. Well, so I think it's, how do I want to phrase this? There's a couple of things that kind of factor into why I think the exploration in Arkham Asylum is as good as it is. And a big piece of it is that it is a very focused experience. And what I mean by that is something that we've brought up in previous episodes about other games where they get too big for their fucking britches and then things get out of hand, which, spoiler, that in my opinion tends to ended up happening with the other Arkham games where they're like, okay, what if we made this way more open world? And I'm like, that's too much. You're trying to do too much. But that's a discussion for another day. But I think having this very like focused experience of it, we are just doing this inside of Arkham Asylum has a number of really positive side effects. Like one being that it allowed the development team to really focus on the details of this relatively small area and actually do something somewhat akin to the first Dark Souls in that the entire environment is more or less interconnected, and it lends itself a much more like realistic feeling because of that. It feels like it's rooted in sensible like physics and layout. Like it all makes sense. And I think that's really important. Yeah. So because you get this relatively small area that a lot of attention to detail has been placed in, that also kind of fosters a good sense of exploration in that there's enough, in my opinion, without being exhausting. Like there's sort of like a soft ceiling to how much exploration you really are going to have to do because it's such a relatively small area that you're exploring, which to me feels better because I don't like going into a game where it's like, yeah, we have fucking 500 square kilometers of map and isn't that amazing? And I'm like, no, actually that feels really overwhelming and I kind of hate it. So having something that's like, no, you have just this one area and we want you to really explore every nook and cranny of this small area, to me feels better from a gameplay perspective than the fucking Ubisoft formula of like, but what if we gave you a whole continent?
Yeah. It's just the thing with exploring is that it only feels like it's for the purposes of Riddler trophies.
For the most part,
which,
yeah.
Again, I don't hate, and let me tell you why I don't hate them. One, they give you experience points.
Mm-hmm.
They give you 200 experience points per pop. So you can level up to your heart's content with the Riddler, getting the Riddler trophies, which is cool. I like that. I'm like, as a fan of RPGs, that, what's it called? Dopamine gets that dopamine hit right there every single time with the experience points. The other thing is because it's so small, you never feel too, and I think this is what you were getting at, you never feel too inconvened by going after them, especially if you're in detective mode. Like the path to get to a lot of these Riddler trophies is pretty obvious. If you just kind of look around the environment, look at the map, you're like, oh, okay, that's what I do. I have the gadget to do this. So that's all there. And the other thing is you don't have to get any of them. Like the exploration in this game is, for the most part, completely optional. You only have to do the story events. That's all the game really asks you to do. It's just that it behooves you to go after some of these trophies and go after some of these objects, because it also provides lore on the background of the island, about what's going on there. It gives you, and these things aren't required, but it like gets you into the mentality of all the villains that you're fighting throughout the game. Even the ones that aren't there, you get character profiles by solving some of these riddles, and they have all this information on characters that like just obscure Batman villains, like you said, Calendar Man or the ventriloquist, all these other like villains that are in there, and you can look through their profiles, like villains you probably haven't even thought of or heard of. They're from like the 1940s and 50s that you can just get all these profiles on. And that's why I love the Riddler trophies, because I think that Batman has such a rich history, and just getting this information and having all these seeing like their cells and how they lived, and being in the asylum where Batman sent them. And it's not just like they're these just villains you threw in there. It's like, oh, okay, there's all this information, and then you can get a background information on them by doing the Riddler trophies. I don't know why that like just piques my interest to the max, but I fucking love it. And that's why I love collecting Riddler trophies.
No, I think that's a great assessment of it. And I think that's an important thing to point out, is that it's not just a collectible for the sake of a collectible to get like an achievement. Like it is, in that you get an achievement for doing it, but you also get all this extra sort of like, tertiary, lore and information. And that's, so there's other, and not to mention XP, but there are other tangible rewards for doing these collectibles other than just, I collected all the things because I wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they get more ridiculous. I think I hated them in Arkham City. I couldn't fucking stand them in Arkham City because the environment's so big.
Well, that's exactly what I'm getting at, is that there's a critical mass, as far, and kind of no pun intended, of fucking land mass, where it's like at some point it gets overwhelming. And I think a lot of development houses and game companies, I think, are kind of realizing that slowly over the years, of like, hey, we don't like having a fucking giant map is not necessarily a selling point, and scaling those things back to really have a well-crafted experience, I think is more important. I think it's better having just a giant world for your game just for the sake of having it, because there's no way to like feasibly have a development team put in the amount of attention to detail and care and effort into every fucking square mile of your map. So they just have to sort of like procedurally generate copy pasted assets across the entire map. It's soulless. Like, that's not fun. And I hope that places are realizing that and kind of trying to come back to this specifically, this sort of design style, because I think it really does offer a richer gaming experience doing it this way than just trying to like go like the summer blockbuster route of like, well, this is fucking bottom tier, minimum effort shit, but there sure is a lot of it, and we're gonna wow you with some fireworks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm at the point, and I haven't played a lot of open world games, but if you're advertising to me as a game developer or game publisher that this is the biggest open world game you've ever seen in your life, there's a 100% chance I'm not going to play.
Oh, yeah, no, that has definitely been added to the list of like buzzwords that if I hear, I'm like, and I am out. That one. I'm also getting real sick of seeing roguelike or card deck builder. Like, can you guys fuck off with that already? We have too many of those.
Some people love it.
I know Randall's probably going to call me out in Discord when this drops, but anyway, he really likes those games. I feel like they have their place, but it's one of those things that like, I think developers have just run into the fucking ground. Like, not everything needs to be a roguelite, for the love of God. But anyway,
yeah,
that's a different discussion.
But earlier you were talking about, the immense amount of detail that you put into your environments and how carefully crafted it is. And I think that's a good way to segue into the graphics.
Hey,
I will let you start this discussion here. What did you think of the graphics?
They're fantastic. And I actually still think they hold up extremely well today, which in a way is pretty impressive given that it is going for the very, gritty realism approach. And that is dangerous in a lot of cases because a lot of games that try to do that don't necessarily age very well. It's something we've talked a lot about on this show over the last almost 10 years. But I think this game holds up very, very well in that department. I mean, looking at it today, and again, you have to kind of, you would have to look at the original release because obviously we got the remaster, which kind of, bumps the quality up by a few years. But even looking at the original, I might go out on a limb to say that a lot of people might not even be able to tell that it was a game that was released like 13 years ago or more than that, actually.
Ooh.
What are we, like 15? What are we at now? 15? Is that what it is?
15 years. We're right there. We're at 15.
So I think it holds up well enough that it could feasibly, and I'm not saying that it would be like, oh, this is AAA top tier 2024 graphics. But what I'm saying is that I think it could feasibly pass as a new game release. That's my take. I don't know. From your reaction, I feel like that's a somewhat spicy take, but I'm sticking with it.
I wouldn't call it spicy. Like the way you're talking about it, I think it's more like one of those you're talking about it and how you remembered it. Because I mean,
to be fair, I did look at the fucking game like before we talked about this. I did.
I get that, but like I played this on a 360, and
well, I mean that might also be your problem. I mean, you could play the original on a PC and it looked better than the 360. But.
Oh, I'm sure it does. I'm sure because updates, mods, whatever. But oh man, why everyone is shiny? The lighting is
okay. Yes,
bad.
I will give you that one. Yes, it's got the Vaseline look.
Everyone looks like they're out of Gears of War.
It was the style
Everyone
at the time,
looks like
Chris.
they're from Gears of War. Well, it's using the same engine too.
Yeah.
Like the female characters look weird, mostly because I don't think female characters were designed for Gears of War. So like Harley Quinn just looks weird. She just like nowadays I think she looks a little weird. I'm sure back in 2009 it'd be like, yeah, her character model's like really good looking, really smoking hot, same with Poison Ivy, blah 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 blah. But like nowadays it's just like, I don't know, it's just there's a look about it. You could tell like the resolution is a lot lower than a game that would be released later, even in like the end of that console cycle or during the PS4 Xbox One era. Like it shows its age. It doesn't, that's not to say it looks bad, but it does. Like I always dismiss the argument that, PS3 games and Xbox 360 games don't hold up. And I think that's just mostly because I haven't played a lot of modern games. But then when I start playing a little bit more modern games and I go back and play those games, it's kind of like, oh, oof. Okay, there is a difference. It's very noticeable just by the lighting effects. Like that's the biggest difference, especially when detective mode is off. In fact, me having detective mode on the entire game, I think obfuscated just how much of the game has aged poorly in that department. And again, I'm not saying this game looks horrible. This isn't like saying it looks like a PS1 game or an early PS2 game. But there's like the darkness and grittiness almost, like most dark and gritty games, almost hinder it in so many ways as well. The environmental like leaves on trees and just like dirt and stuff like that, especially when you're out in the general environment when it is more open, they look bad. They look bad for today. I'll say that again, for today, they do not look good. So I gotta say, man, it does look like a 2009 game. if you're playing it on the hardware it was originally intended to come out to, PS3 or Xbox 360, I'm sure the remaster fixes a lot of that. I'm sure if you play the Switch game, you wouldn't have any of those problems. But playing the original copy or Game of the Year edition or whatever, like you can tell that we have advanced.
Well, I think you're right in the maybe the biggest sort of like delta between then and now is the advancements in lighting techniques, because we've sort of hit a point of diminishing returns with graphics themselves, like as far as like, you know, texture, clarity, and like resolution and detail, etc. But I think the advancements really have been more in lighting department, like with ray tracing and like that sort of a thing, making more realistic lighting, I think is kind of like where a lot of graphics improvements have happened. And so that makes sense comparing the original to like what we would see now. I think the other part of it is that you kind of brought it up, but like, given that neither one of us generally play a lot of like brand new games these days, it may also be that like my perception of what a brand new game in 2024 should look like is not accurate. That's 100% possible.
The only reason I know is because I'm able to watch my kids play games. So
yes.
I live vicariously and enjoy the graphical fidelity through them.
I was saying the new games that I'm playing are isometric and from like a bird's eye view, so the graphics don't necessarily show it quite as much.
It's not quite going for the same look as Batman, is what you're trying to say.
No.
I think that covers the graphics. Slight disagreement there. I don't think it looks bad, but yeah, I think you can tell. It played on a PC, as Shane said, if you're going to go for the original one.
Yeah.
Or don't play it on 360 or PS3.
Yeah, I mean,
don't do that.
Probably not. I think PC or remaster is probably the way to go.
Yeah. Let's get into the sound design. I don't really want to say music because, I mean, it's all atmospheric. Not saying it's bad, but it's atmospheric stuff. But you can say whatever about that.
Well, that makes this category kind of difficult because there's not really a lot in the way of like an OST, really, in the more traditional sense. So, but I don't know if it has to, right? Like, I think the style of game that this is, I think having, you know, very sort of upfront, like orchestral music or something would probably be maybe a little too intrusive. So I think the right decision was made. It just doesn't leave us a whole lot to talk about here. I think the
for
focus,
music, no.
Yeah, well, I think the focus is really going to be more on sound design, but generally, I think it's going to be more about the voice acting. So,
yes, at least what we're slobbering praise over is going to be the voice acting, because you're right. The atmosphere, the music that exists here is all meant to be atmospheric. That's all it really does. It's supposed to do vibes, and it does it well. Doesn't do it poorly. So good for you, Arkham Asylum. Great sound design for providing the background noise / slight music to get you through. But and sounds, you're fine too. There's really not much to say. It just works, right? Everything sounds like it's supposed to. I'll provide more on the back end of this, but let's get into the voice acting. Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, my God, they make this game.
Oh yeah,
they fucking make this game.
It really cannot be understated how important it was that they had these voice actors from the animated series reprise their roles. And let's not leave out Arlene Sorkin either, because she's fantastic as well.
She is too.
Yeah, no, man, I fucking love Mark Hamill, dude. And like he's so good. He's so good. It's funny because, you know, back in the day, I don't think anybody necessarily saw it coming based purely on, you know, like Star Wars and what have you. But man, over the years, Hamill has absolutely made himself like one of the preeminent voice actors. He's so versatile and he's so expressive. Like, I cannot think of anyone else that I would want the Joker to be voiced by. I mean, it's happened, but the bar is always Mark Hamill. And in my opinion, I think anything else falls short.
Mark Hamill is a better Joker than a Luke Skywalker.
Yes. Yes, I would agree with that. I would rather him be taunting Batsy than like whining about power converters in Tashi Station. Yes.
And drinking milk.
Oh, well, I don't even want to talk about that version of Luke Skywalker. that doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. It's not canon. It's not canon in my head. Let's go with that.
Anyway, I can't think of a single bad voice acting performance in this game, period. Like, period. I think the closest you might get is the thugs, but like they're not bad.
No.
I can't complain about it. I love the fact that there's always something happening at any point in the game. You can just hear people talk like you're just around them. They're just having conversations like it's alive. Like the world is alive.
Oh yeah. Did you do the thing that I did where you just like sit on a gargoyle and just listen to henchmen like fucking talk to each other?
Yes.
Yeah.
They repeat after a while, right? But
sure.
What are you going to expect? But I mean, just there's so much good here. I didn't really notice a lot of the stereo sound really having much of an impact in terms of, me needing to do things in terms of sound design there. Like, and the general gadgets sound good. Like your batarangs sound like batarangs. I don't know. There's not really much to say about the sound because the rest of the sound just does what it's supposed to do. So I don't really know. I think the only thing that was really weird is like, when you get like the hook shot thingy or the bat line or whatever it's called, like that kind of confused me sometimes. Cause when you deploy it, to me, it sounded like the teeth chattering that you have to beat as part of the Riddler challenges from time to time.
Okay.
But that's as much as I'm going to say on this, the sound. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could really say much more about anything there other than the voice acting is fucking phenomenal.
Yeah. And I think, in this particular instance, the fact that we don't necessarily have anything, standing out about the sound design, I think says enough about it. Like it does what it needed to do. In my opinion, it's generally pretty rare that you're going to have something from the sound design department that you're going to like identify as like, oh, this is fucking amazing and I have to point it out.
One thing I do need to is the combat, the punches landing, especially when you land like a knockout blow.
Yeah.
That sounds so visceral. And
yeah, no, it's good.
Oh,
it's crunchy.
I love it.
It's like a chalupa. Like I was saying, I think generally, if we're going to point out something in sound design, it's usually something negative because that's the things that will stand out. Sound design is much, and this is going to appeal to like approximately 20 people, but sound design to me is a lot like middleware, like in the world of software, in that nobody gives a shit about it until something's wrong. So if it's working as expected, then you're really not going to notice it. And I feel like that's kind of how sound design generally works too.
Yes. Except if you're an audiophile, as you already said, the 20 people who will say that's not true.
I was saying the 20 people who know or give a shit about middleware, but
oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know or give a shit about middleware, which is probably why it went over my head.
I know. Listen, I know Lyle's got my back. That's fine.
I'm sure he does. He's a penguin.
He is.
All right. So I don't think we have anything more to add on to the sound design / music or whatever we talked about with the music or sound there. I think it's time to get into the patron pontifications. What do you think, Shane?
You know what? I think so.
All right. So this part of the show is called our patron pontifications, where we read what our patrons think about today's episode, today's game. And what can you do in order to get your thoughts read on a future episode? It's quite easy, actually. Go over to our Patreon, which is in our link tree. Sign up there. If you don't want to go to our link tree, that's fine. It's patreon.com/retrohangover and join for as little as $1 a month. Then head over to our Discord and find the section called Patron Pontifications. And we will have the topic there for our upcoming episode for you to post about. And we are going to open this up with Matt, aka Stormageddon, from the quotation marks fun and quotation marks and games podcast, and also Reignite. And they say one of the best comic book based video games ever made. Also, the best voice performances of the Batman and Joker in the pantheon of Batman media. Mark Hamill is the best Joker, and Kevin Conroy, may he rest in peace, is Batman. Full stop. Yeah, not much disagreement with you there, Matt. Shane, I'm going to love to hear you read this one.
I will preemptively say thank you, Keith Gasper of the Still Alive Main Quest podcast, for making me read this on the air. All right, here we go. Na Batman. There you go. That's the whole thing.
I really like his thoughts about those subtle thoughts about the inner workings of the plot details of Arkham Asylum there.
Yes, and also
great take.
Boom, pow, and spiff or something.
Yes. Next is Dave Jackson from the Tales from the Backlog podcast. Of course, all of these previous dear patrons are friends of the show, and you should go check out all of these shows. And Dave says, growing up as a fan of the animated series, I always tried whatever Batman games I could find on Super Nintendo, Game Gear, and more, and thought they all sucked. Insert, you weren't wrong. Until Arkham Asylum. It's been memed to death, but the meme exists for a reason. It did make you feel like Batman. I love the boss fights. Not you, final boss Joker. I love stealthing around rooms and stringing up goons. And Arkham Asylum's combat system was fun and turned out to be really influential. I didn't like Arkham City or Arkham Knight as much, so this will always be a special game for me. Thank you, Dave.
All right, and next up, we have the one and only Alt, who says, I'm not even sure if I can put into words just how much this Batman game means to me. Like many others, I grew up with Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill's Batman and Joker. This game encapsulates that feeling of the 90s show so well and has aged so gracefully where I replay it almost annually at this point, trying to match the season each game takes place in for the ultimate immersion. The sense of dread and fear, but also the adrenaline and power is so unique. It feels like you're in Resident Evil 1 in terms of isolation, and that's where the fear kicks in a bit with the Killer Croc and Scarecrow bits. But at the same time, you realize, hold on, I'm Batman. You stalk the shadows out of sight of the inmates until that perfect moment where you take out Mobster A, and then Mobster C panics and starts freaking out because no, they realize they're trapped in here with you. This game was the tipping point of me realizing a game doesn't need to be 25 plus hours long to be worth a full retail price, an issue people seem to have nowadays. The presentation, the sound, the voice acting, the admittedly overpowered detective vision, where there's memes of people never seeing what the real game actually looked like, the gameplay, it is all fantastic. If I'm making a top 100 list, this game is on it. Maybe even top 50. All right. Thank you, Alt.
You know, he makes a point I always love when our patrons make points in here. We went this entire episode without going, I'm Batman.
I thought about it.
That's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it crossed my mind. I also wanted to say justice, but I didn't do that either. So, well, I did now. So there you go.
Commissioner Gordon. I missed that. What was the web series?
Oh God, I can't even remember.
College
now.
Humor? I think it was College Humor.
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Moving on to Adam from the Good, the Bad, and the Backlog podcast. And Adam says, I thought the game was all right. The combat was okay, I guess, but I wasn't super into it. Some of the boss fights were kind of okay. The exploration was okay. I got really bored collecting those Riddler trophies for the platinum, though. I don't know, guys. I feel like it was a great game for the time, but it didn't really stand out for me, and I've always found it kind of middle of the road. It didn't impress me enough to play the sequels, and Batman is one of the lamest superheroes to me, so that doesn't help. Well, thank you, Adam, for your thoughts.
Yeah. Also, for the record, I think Superman is one of the lamest superheroes. So
yes, Superman sucks.
Yeah, he's fucking awful. But anyway.
So does Captain Marvel for the exact same reasons.
Yes, they are supremely overpowered and therefore boring. But anyway, this is a Batman episode. So next up is Lunchbox, aka the Disgruntled Gamer, also Thunderdome Gaming Society on YouTube, who says, When this released in 2009, it was a very big deal. For the most part, prior to this release, superhero games were all right at best. This exploded onto the scene, and Rocksteady became Rockstars overnight. This release would become the standard for superhero games going forward. Batman is just so damn rad if done correctly. The world is immersive, the combat was fun, everything about the characters made you want to play the game. The Riddler trophies / challenges were so well executed as a collectible that it's just next level. Also, after you finish the game, there was a challenge mode to test your skills. And if I remember correctly, each platform had unique levels. There is a reason why this game is highly regarded. It is Batman done right. You have the best voice actors for Batman and Joker, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. The game will always be remembered, and I'm so glad I was there on day one. R.I.P. Kevin Conroy, aka the Batman.
Right next is Omi. And Omi says, Arkham Asylum was the intelligent decision to do a licensed superhero game outside of a film release cycle so that they could actually take their time and do a good job of it. The results speak for themselves. I agree. I don't think it wasn't outside of a film release schedule, though, because it was right the year after The Dark Knight, which means it was the year before or a couple of years before whatever the third one was. I can't remember the names of these movies anymore. The Dark Knight Rises, that's what it was. So actually, that makes it more impressive. I mean, we mentioned it, but we didn't really say it. That makes it more impressive because they didn't make it a game based off The Dark Knight or Batman Begins. That is worth noting.
Yeah, well, I think that's what Omi was probably getting at, is that it wasn't beholden to the film release cycle. It was sort of outside of it, so they were able to kind of take the time to really work on it and get it to where they needed to be, so they weren't under a crunch deadline to get it out like in time for the movie release or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just dumb. I just wanted to laud that fact. All right, over to you, Shane.
All right, and last but certainly not least, we have Masked Keaton, who tells us, I was gifted a refurbished Xbox 360 from a friend. He also sent a used copy of Arkham Asylum because he wanted me to try it. So when the fear gas antics started and the game breaks, I was freaking out, thinking I broke his gift or that he sent me a bad Xbox.
That is awesome.
Yeah, thank you for that unique experience, Keaton. We appreciate that.
Reminds me of this cat story with Fatal Frame. All right, now it's time to give our thoughts about whether or not we think this game holds up today. I think this is obvious. I'm going to keep this short and sweet as much as I can because I like to go on and bloviate. But yeah, it absolutely holds up today. I think at the time, it's not going to get my game of the year because I have beaten this within the past 10 years, so I don't want to do that. But this is my favorite game I've played this year. This is such a joy. I love this game. I love everything about this game. Like most games, it's not a perfect game, so I'm going to add that little qualifier. But yeah, this game holds up. It's fantastic. Go play it. Go play the remastered edition. Go play the PC version. Go play it on Switch. I don't care. If you like yourself a good little game, just get brushed up on the Batman lore just a little bit and go and play this. It's a great time. You're not going to regret it. So there you go. How about yourself, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm not going to disagree. I absolutely think this game still holds up today. I mean, I would say arguably minor quibbles about whether or not the graphics tend to hold up as well as we would like. It's still fantastic. And the thing is to me, this is still to this day the definitive Batman game, like bar none, full stop. You certainly had 3 other Arkham games that came out after this, but I imagine we will inevitably talk about at least one of those at some point. But I will just say on record right now that I don't think any of them lived up to this. There were some improvements for sure, some iterations on a formula, but I think this captured the Batman experience and did it in a way that is super accessible and very rewarding. And the fact that you can get this done, not necessarily 100%ing everything, but according to my playtime, in about 12 hours is about how long it took me to finish it. That is a super reasonable amount of time. And you get a fucking stellar third-person action combat game out of the deal. So there's really not a lot negative to say here. And especially because the remasters exist, there's really no reason not to play it. Like, even if you sort of only know Batman because you heard about it, or you've seen the Chris Nolan movies, or you saw the newer ones that I definitely have not seen that I've heard are okay. If you're into combat, like combat games like this, then you would probably be doing yourself a disservice by not checking this out.
I think that ends it. Yes, I agree, by the way. I have not played Origins or Night, but it is... I had a lot more fun with Asylum than I did with City. A lot more fun. I think this is infinitely better. Well, not infinitely. God, I'm just using hyperbole all over the place today. I think this is better than Arkham City. I would rather play Asylum 10 times out of 10 over Arkham City. Easily.
Oh yeah, agreed.
Yeah. But that brings us to the end of our episode today. A little bit of a shorter one. How about that?
I know, crazy. Guess that's what happens when we don't have guests.
So I'm going to give the ghost that's sitting next to me time to plug their podcast. No? You don't want to? Okay. Apparently our ghost guest does not want to plug the podcast. So Shane, how about you let the good people know all about what we do out there if they are just finding us for the first time?
Yeah, well, if that happens to be you, then hello. We're glad that you're here. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you liked it enough that you want to hear more from us, well, you are in luck, because we have been yapping into microphones for almost a decade now, which means that you have a whole ton of content just waiting for you to consume. So should you find yourself on a long road trip or a flight or something like that, then we have got you covered, because we have so much for you to put into your ear holes that you may not even get through it all. And arguably, you probably shouldn't to a certain point, because going too far back, you get into territory that I don't think Chris and I are particularly proud of. But that's a different story. No. So, yeah. But there's plenty for you that is good. And you know, we would ask that you go and check that out. And we make that simple for you because, you know, we don't want to make things too complicated. So we've streamlined that process for you to get to everything that has to do with the show, whether it is in fact that main feed and all of the content there, or perhaps you would like to support the show by becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month. And in doing so, not only supports small creators like us who are doing this just for the love of the game, but also gets you access to a bunch of extra content. So if the main feed wasn't enough for you and you are just that voracious, then we've also got you there too. So consider checking that out. We also have the merch store if you want to get some sweet swag. And we have our socials, as is required by everybody these days. We have a presence on the Instagram and the Twitter, or the X, I guess, as it's called these days. And also we have our YouTube channel, which by the time this comes out, we should be not only streaming to Twitch, which Chris will tell you a bit more about here in just a moment, but we will also be simulcasting to our YouTube channel as well. So if you would like to check out what we do in the streaming world, you now will have two venues for that to join us live. So Chris, why don't you tell the people a little bit more about what we do on Sunday nights?
You know, I was a little surprised that some people made it this far in the episode. I did get some comments about the taste of buttholes. So I got to think of some other crazy shit to say. And if you want to talk about how breast milk tastes, how fresh it will taste when it's coming right out of the titty, because I got to move from the asshole over to the titty, then come over to twitch.tv/retro hangover. and you can talk about how it's nice to suck on them titties and just go glug, 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 glug with unpasteurized breast milk from someone random out there. I mean, it could be a male with breast milk that you're getting it from. Doesn't have to be exclusive. From what I understand, men lactate too. So go find that titty and that's lactating and go suck on it and get the flavor of that and report back to us over at twitch.tv/retrohangover Sundays at 9 p.m. Eastern time when we stream. And let me know if you heard this segment. Maybe you can talk to about all the nasty stuff Batman is saying that he's doing with Ra's al Ghul's daughter in that one College Humor skit where he talks about doing ass to mouth and all sorts of other things. In fact, let us know if you're into ass to mouth. I'm not, but there are people out there. So have an ass to mouth time over at twitch.tv/retrohangover at 9 p.m. Eastern time.
I kind of feel like I should stop asking you to do this blog. it's just getting progressively weirder.
It's for the people, Shane.
Sure, I guess. I mean, listen, if that is what the people want, then we are here to please them, if nothing else, I suppose. So there you have it.
I'm just trying to prove the people don't want or do not want. They do not know that it exists. There is no try.
All right.
Well, there is a try. He's been on our show.
That's true. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess it's a good thing that we're wrapping this up because I have no fucking idea where to go from there. So until next time,
play with your. I fucking love Mark Hamill as the Joker joysticks.
Shane here with a quick message. The one rule Chris and I have always gone by regarding advertisements is this. It has to be something we use and can personally vouch for. If you know me, you know I love coffee. And Bones Coffee Company has been my go-to for home brewing for quite some time now. Their small batch beans come in an impressive variety of flavors like Mint Invaders from Chocolate Space, or Electric Unicorn, which I swear tastes exactly like Fruity Pebbles. And the best part? No added sugar or calories involved, just natural flavors infused right into the beans themselves. Build your own sample pack of 5 4-ounce bags to find out which flavors speak to you, or jump in head first with full 12-ounce bags. They've even got K-Cups. Step up your homebrew game with Bones Coffee by visiting bit.ly/RHPBones. That's bit.ly/RHPBONES.